Hall tonight.
We remain firmly within a budget crisis. It is a crisis that we can and will overcome.
Facing a $5.4 billion budget shortfall, Mayor Mamdani says his administration may be forced to increase property taxes if Governor Hochul does not agree to raise taxes on wealthy New Yorkers and corporations. We'll break it all down in just a minute. Later on tonight, I'll talk about the mayor's spending plan with his first deputy mayor and the city's budget director.
Use hope and imagination as weapons of survival and progress.
We are remembering the life of Reverend Jesse Jackson, a prominent leader of the civil rights movement and two-time presidential candidate. I'll talk about his legacy and connection to our city with Mark Morial, the president and CEO of the National Urban League, later tonight. For the best news, debate, and analysis of New York City politics, join us inside City Hall. Good evening and welcome to Inside City Hall for Tuesday, February 17th, 2026. I'm Ayana Harry in for Errol Lewis. In his first city budget plan presented today, Mayor Zohran Mamdani argued if Governor Kathy Hochul doesn't agree to a tax hike on the wealthy, then he will have to raise property taxes on millions of city homeowners to help pay for current city expenditures as well as new expenses. But he did get some pushback, not only from property owners, but city council leaders who think he should rein in city spending first. Our Bernadette Hogan joins me now with more on tonight's top story. Bernadette, good evening.
Good evening, Ayana. And this comes after Mamdani presented a preliminary budget plan where he compared the city's finances to the Great Recession. But of course, he received major pushback when he brought up property tax hikes.
Nothing about this is typical. That's why our solutions won't be either.
Painting a picture of financial gloom and doom for the Big Apple, Mayor Zohran Mamdani said if Governor Kathy Hochul does not agree to tax the rich, then millions of city homeowners will pay the price.
Faced with no other choice, the city would have to exercise the only revenue lever fully within our own control. We would have to raise property taxes. We would also be forced to raid our reserves,
threatening the first across-the-board property tax rate increase since Mayor Michael Bloomberg in the early 2000s. Mamdani argued for his preferred way to close the two-year multi-billion-dollar budget holes, now standing at $5.4 billion. Also, directing city agencies to cut the fat by March 20th.
We believe that 2.5% is the highest level of savings that we can anticipate agency-wide without starting to inhibit city services.
The mayor also said he's unwilling to cut more, despite announcing plans to hire more workers and increase NYPD spending on FIFA World Cup security preparations. But critics said he's not looking at all the options.
There is a third option. It should be on the table. In fact, it's the first option that should be on the table, which is to identify where you can save money in city budget because it's not improving New Yorkers' lives.
The impacts on black and brown communities. We talked a lot about making sure that this affordability agenda would benefit everyone. This is absolutely a non-starter for me.
That's why I say it's tax mail. It's blackmailing the New York City elected officialdom to say either give me what I need in Albany or I'm going to be raising taxes on your constituents here at home.
After giving City Hall an extra $1.5 billion in state funds, Hochul said Tuesday Mamdani needs to go back to the drawing board.
I'm not supportive of property tax increase. I don't know that that's necessary.
Any property tax increases would also need City Council approval. But both City Council Speaker Julie Menon and Council Finance Chair Linda Lee said they're not on board. Quote, the council believes there are additional areas of savings and revenue that deserve careful scrutiny before increasing the burden on small property owners and neighborhood small businesses, which could worsen the affordability crisis. Asked why he's considering plans that could contradict his affordability promise, Mamdani.
Our agenda is not simply one to protect the city services that we already provide. It's to advance an agenda that makes it easier for working class people to live in this city.
And right now the city is projecting a $122 billion spending plan, which has to be closed by the end of June. And next year, Ayanna, that will rise to $127 billion.
Bernadette, the mayor ran on a pretty expensive and ambitious affordability agenda. One of the departments that he spoke about in running for office was the Department of Community Safety.
Right.
Is that in the budget?
Well, right now, so we asked that, and they said that that is in the budget, but you have to wait and see what the price tag will be. But they're trying to put the Department of Community Safety into City Hall, meaning that it wouldn't operate technically similar to the way an agency would. Part of the reason being then the City Council would also not have as much of a say over spending to that department. But Ayanna, that's just one of the many question marks that reporters had, frankly, after looking at budget books and then asking questions of both Mamdani and his top budget aides. Another big question is if the property tax plan goes through, and if they try to then lobby Albany for reform, right, because that's a different conversation, changing exactly how, working class New Yorkers versus those that really haven't had a tax increase in a while, how that would work, how that would also impact his plan to freeze rent-stabilized apartment units. And Dean Foulahan, Mayor Mamdani's first deputy mayor, he said, well, we'll get back to you on that.
One of the other big question marks in the budget is what these chief savings officers might find.
Right.
Last month, the mayor signed this executive order. He's requesting all agencies find savings. When do we expect those decisions, those reports to be done?
Right. That deadline, Ayanna, is March 20th. So right now, Mamdani is projecting each agency should try to hit a minimum of 2.5% in agency cuts or savings, as they're called them. But it could end up being more, which could help this budget gap. But Mamdani still says, regardless, he's still looking at the tax hike on corporations and on the rich. And that's something that he's favoring over this, as he described it, more nuclear decision, which would be the property tax hike.
Okay, thank you, Bernadette. And today, Reverend Jesse Jackson, one of the most influential civil rights leaders of the 20th century, died at the age of 84. He was the protege of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and led the civil rights movement for decades after his assassination. Reverend Jackson also had a long career in politics, one that had a major impact around the country and right here in New York City. Jackson died this morning surrounded by his family, his wife Jacqueline, 6 children, and multiple grandchildren. They called him a, quote, servant leader, not only to our family, but to the oppressed, the voiceless, and the overlooked around the world. Our Bobby Kuza takes a look back at Jackson's life and legacy.
Jesse Jackson's voice was unmistakable.
Young America, dream!
Over more than 5 decades in public life, he used his oratory to rally support to the cause of social justice and to his own political campaigns. That included 2 runs for president that fell short but inspired millions.
Live beyond the pain of reality with the dream of a bright tomorrow. Use hope and imagination.
Born in South Carolina, Jackson immediately thrust himself into the civil rights movement after college and was seen as a natural successor to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whom he worked alongside. Jackson was in Memphis near King when he was killed and took part in the funeral procession. In the early 70s, he founded his own organization called Operation Push and became a leading voice on issues of race and poverty, later forming a separate group called the Rainbow Coalition. When he ran for president in the 1984 Democratic primary, he faced long odds, but managed a surprising third-place finish behind Walter Mondale and Gary Hart. That positioned him as a leading candidate when he kicked off his 1988 campaign.
If I win, it means hope is electable. It means justice is electable.
Jackson won 11 primary contests, but ultimately lost out to Michael Dukakis. He delivered a rousing speech at the Democratic convention.
We must never surrender. America will get better and better. Keep hope alive.
Jackson traveled the globe meeting with foreign leaders, negotiating the release of prisoners in Cuba, Yugoslavia, and elsewhere. And he remained for decades a fixture in the civil rights movement, fighting for progressive causes.
Too few have too much, subsidized by the government. Too many have little, neglected by the government. And so priorities have to change.
History will remember Jackson both for his body of work as an advocate and as a groundbreaking politician who paved the way for others.
Keep hope! Keep hope! Alive! Alive! Keep hope! Keep hope! Alive! Alive! We'll fight fight. We will fight for justice. For justice.
Bobby Kuza, New York 1.
It is now time for a break. We will keep our focus on Reverend Jesse Jackson's life and legacy. Next, we'll tell you how lawmakers and leaders across New York are remembering the former civil rights leader and the impact he had right here on our city. Stay with us. We are back in a minute.
Every day tells a new story. At Mornings on One, we're dedicated to bringing you the stories that matter most to start your day. With in-depth coverage of the day's news.
I'm Pat Kernan. Here are the stories we're following.
And weather updates every 10 minutes.
Tomorrow, some morning sunshine possible. Clouds take over.
It's our responsibility to get you the information you need before you head out the door. Mornings on One. Weekdays starting at 6 on the Spectrum News app. Free for Spectrum and Xfinity customers.
When you're connected with Spectrum, you get 5G and fiber-powered internet combined for the fastest wireless speeds. So you can sweat for the right reasons. It's only the seamless connection you love at home, everywhere you go. It's only everything.
I'm Sandra, this is Jorge, and we were adopted in 2019. I remember when they first came to us, Michael was already a teenager. The whole cliche of they're so lucky to have you guys, and it's the other way around. They have changed our family for the better. They chose to love us. They didn't have to. They chose us. Family.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org.
And that's a look at some of what's in the papers this morning. We've done with the sports section.
Today's story is about the latest chapter for a beloved local business.
It's a beautiful day with temperatures in the 60s, but showers are expected in the next hour.
In a city that's always on the go, it's important to stop to hear the stories that connect us.
The news that matters to New Yorkers. That's what brings us together. That's Mornings on One.
Weekdays starting at 6.
Welcome back to Inside City Hall. Jesse Jackson was widely revered by many politicians across the country, including here in New York. When news of his death emerged today, those tributes began pouring in. Our Courtney Gross has that part of the story. Courtney, good evening.
Ayanna, those tributes did pour in today. Now, Jesse Jackson was a populist who inspired millions of voters over many decades to either vote or register to vote. And his legacy as a civil rights leader was certainly remembered here in the 5 boroughs today, as well as in Washington.
My constituency is the desperate, the damned, the disinherited, the disrespected, and the despised.
The Reverend Jesse Jackson aimed to represent a rainbow of constituencies, Black Americans and the working poor, drawn to his personality and his mission.
I remember Reverend Jackson saying, Attorney Crump, always remember, you don't drown because the water is deep. You drown because you stop kicking. You can never stop kicking, Brother Crump. You can never stop kicking.
Attorney Ben Crump, one of many paying tribute to the civil rights icon who died on Tuesday.
Time and again, we knew that hope still lived because Reverend Jesse Jackson kept it alive.
More came from the country's top leaders, saying they were saddened by his death, calling the leader and 2-time presidential candidate legendary. Senator Charles Schumer said he was a fearless warrior for justice, going on to call him one of the most powerful forces for positive change in our country and in our world. President Trump, too, reminisced, posting photos of the two on his Truth Social account from the 80s, and going on to say he was a good man with lots of personality, grit, and street smarts. He was very gregarious.
Somebody who told us to keep hope alive, and during this difficult time in history, you know, he gave us a blueprint on where we need to go to really keep hope alive.
Closer to home, New Yorkers paid tribute. Governor Kathy Hochul said flags would be lowered to half staff in Jackson's honor, a nod to a life that's come to an end and a legacy that lives on.
Our time has come. Our time has come.
And that was from Jackson's address to the Democratic National Convention in 1984. And during his presidential run, such a major theme was about hope, and that certainly inspired so many leaders who came after him. The theme of hope was obviously very present in the candidacy of Barack Obama, who obviously won as the first black president 20 years after Jesse Jackson.
Yeah, Courtney, listening to some of the reactions and responses in your piece, it seems like this is a moment that has really united both Democrats and Republicans in all coming together to remember Reverend Jackson.
Yeah, I was surprised to see what President Donald Trump had put out on Truth Social. I mean, it was not only the statement that he had put out, which one of the last lines of it said that he wasn't a racist because he was friends with Jesse Jackson. So putting that aside, he did post a number of pictures of the two of them together over the course of the 80s and 90s, trying to show that the two appeared to be close at the time, or at least crossed paths.
Okay, Courtney, thank you. And Reverend Jesse Jackson also influenced the social justice movement here in New York. Today, the Reverend Al Sharpton held a news conference remembering Jackson and his legacy of activism across the 5 boroughs. Our Dan Riverly was there and joins me now with that part of the story. Dan, good evening.
Good evening, Ayanna. This was a profound loss for the Reverend Al Sharpton, losing a friend and a mentor who brought him into the civil rights movement as a young teenager, just getting involved in the church. And in the decades since, that relationship continued as they stood side by side each other on the biggest social justice fights here in New York.
Too few have too much, subsidized by the government. Too many have little, neglected by the government.
This is the Reverend Jesse Jackson in New York City during the Occupy Wall Street movement in 2011. Here, Jackson brought his brand of economic populism for a new generation.
We bail out the banks.
Jackson's death at 84 was a profound loss to his friend and protege in the civil rights movement, the Reverend Al Sharpton.
He literally changed American politics, New York politics, and kept the civil rights movement going.
The organizing from Jackson's 2 presidential campaigns in the 1980s credited with building his Rainbow Coalition that toppled Mayor Ed Koch and elected David Dinkins as the first black mayor of New York.
He won the city of New York, which made us believe in '89 we could win, and we did by electing David Dinkins.
Jackson also had his clashes and controversies here. During his '84 campaign, he apologized for using a slur against Jews in New York. Jackson and Ed Koch frequently and publicly fought, though they eventually reconciled, as seen here on New York 1 in 1993.
That looks like a warm and wonderful handshake.
Throughout the 1990s, Jackson continued his activism. He launched the Wall Street Project to open up the corporate world to more minority entrepreneurs and professionals. What do you think his legacy here in New York should be?
Well, his legacy should be about fairness, should be about justice, should be about equal opportunity.
Keith Wright is a former state lawmaker from Harlem, pictured here on the left with Jackson.
If you could have Jesse Jackson take up your issue, no more needs to be said. It already added a real degree of credibility.
Wright recalled Jackson's presence at protests after NYPD officers fatally killed Amadou Diallo in the Bronx.
Jesse Jackson was deeply involved in that, whether it was up on Wheeler Avenue in the Bronx. Jesse was involved.
And the Reverend Al Sharpton will honor the life and legacy of Jackson at a rally at the historic Mother AME Zion Church in Harlem coming up this Saturday, Ayanna.
Yeah, Dan, when we look at the range of the issues here in New York City that Reverend Jackson was involved in, from NYPD-involved deaths of Amadou Diallo, Sean Bell, pushing Wall Street to be more inclusive. It seems like he had more than just a surface involvement with New York City and issues that were unfolding here.
Absolutely. He's so associated with Chicago and starting his civil rights legacy there, but he has a deep legacy here. And as you mentioned, not just issues of racial justice, especially involving young men who were killed by police officers, but then in the corporate world, right? We are Wall Street, the financial center of the world. He didn't leave that arena untouched by his activism, trying to get more minority entrepreneurs, professionals on corporate boards, more opportunities with contracting for minority-owned businesses. businesses. So it really spanned. It was a wide breadth of activism here in New York.
I know Reverend Sharpton has known Reverend Jackson since he was a teenager. It must have been a tough day for him.
It was. He said he woke up to the news that Jackson had died, and he spoke about being able to actually visit Jackson and his family in the last 2 Christmases, even though he was in declining health. And he said while he knew Jackson's health was poor, it still hurt hearing the news that he had passed at age 84.
Yeah, and any sense of the influence that Jesse Jackson has perhaps had on local politics here in New York City. You know, when I read about Jesse Jackson, his focus on populism, his focus on poverty, in some ways it reminds me almost of Zohran Mamdani, but I'm curious if in your reporting today you saw other influences in which, you know, Jesse Jackson seemed to really leave a legacy locally here.
I think it was that 1988 campaign where he registered so many voters here in New York, competed in the primary here in New York City, won it, even though he lost the state. But that carried on, and he built the progressive coalition we see today. I really think that was born out of the coalition he had built in the 80s, and elected David Dinkins, who, by the way, employed a young staffer, Bill de Blasio, who ended up becoming mayor. So I think he really shaped the progressive coalition that it won, it lost, but it also really did have some important political victories here. So as I mentioned, Bill de Blasio, and of course with Zohran Mamdani.
Yeah, Dan Riverly, we greatly appreciate your reporting tonight. And it is time for a break. Coming up, 2 high-stakes meetings were held in Geneva today on the war in Ukraine and Iran's nuclear program. We'll bring you the details next. Stay with us.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
There's nothing quite like the feeling of going to the theater. Onstage celebrates that excitement every week by taking you behind the scenes with the latest news and in-depth interviews of the hottest shows on and off Broadway. So grab a seat, because this is a show you won't want to miss. Join us every Saturday and Sunday at 7:30 p.m. for Onstage.
Onstage is presented by your Tri-State Cadillac dealers. Discover which Cadillac is right for you and elevate your journey.
It's only a hike. It's only made possible by Spectrum Business connecting healthcare providers of all sizes. Like hospitals relying on the Spectrum Fiber broadband network with industry-leading reliability. Practices keeping patient data safe with advanced security. Pharmacies accessing records in the cloud without fail. It's tailored connectivity solutions built for life-changing moments. It's only a hike. It's only everything. Spectrum Business.
Mom was always organized, but she started forgetting to pay her bills on time.
And she'd buy the same gifts over and over.
Telling the girls about my Alzheimer's diagnosis was really hard. At first, we had our cries, but then we were like, okay, let's make a plan.
Early detection gave us time to adapt together.
It's so important for you to think about what you can do and making the most of what you have.
If you or your family are noticing changes, it could be Alzheimer's. Talk about seeing a doctor together.
From my time growing up in Queens watching New York 1 to my time reporting here, I've seen how quickly a story can change. At News All Day, we bring you the news as it's happening, from around the boroughs to local government to your neighborhood, because our city never stops moving.
Hi, I'm Shannon Ferry with the day's developing stories. But first,
stay up to date and informed with News All Day, weekdays from noon to 4.
Welcome back to Inside City Hall. U.S. diplomacy took center stage in Switzerland today. President Donald Trump sent 2 trusted advisors to Geneva for a busy day of negotiations over both Russia's war on Ukraine and Iran's nuclear program. Our national political reporter Taylor Popolars joins me now from the White House. Taylor, good evening.
Good evening, Ayanna. You know, so much of President Trump's second term has revolved around foreign policy and diplomacy, and this was the latest example where his 2 trusted advisors were literally partaking in shuttle diplomacy, trying to negotiate peace, 2 very different peace deals that were being negotiated just miles apart from each other. A literal case of shuttle diplomacy playing out in Switzerland Tuesday. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, President Donald Trump's son-in-law, participating in high-level talks about Russia's war on Ukraine and Iran's nuclear program, about 1 mile apart from each other in Geneva.
So I'll be involved in those talks indirectly, and they'll be very important, and we'll see what can happen.
The president said that Monday night about Iran. The country of Oman has been serving as an intermediary as the future of Iran's nuclear program hangs in the balance. Iran's foreign minister told state TV after Tuesday's meeting that the two sides agreed on, quote, guiding principles, but paperwork would need to be drawn up before a third round of talks. Vice President J.D. Vance told this to Fox News.
You know, in some ways it went well. They agreed to meet afterwards. But in other ways, it was very clear that the president has set some red lines that the Iranians are not yet willing to actually acknowledge and work through.
President Trump is still moving a second aircraft carrier toward Iran as he leaves more military strikes on the table. Iran's supreme leader warned Tuesday he could sink the ship.
I don't think they want the consequences of not making a deal. They want to make a deal.
The latest round of talks between Russia and Ukraine came next as Russia's war reaches the 4-year mark next week. President Trump is currently pressuring Ukraine more, even though Russia continued bombing civilian targets overnight.
Look, so far, Ukraine better come to the table fast. That's all I'm telling you.
Russian state media and Ukrainian officials said the talks would resume on Wednesday. Now, these negotiations are playing out as President Trump's team here at the White House wants him to focus more on domestic policy, specifically the idea of affordability. And the president is scheduled to travel to the battleground state of Georgia on Thursday to talk about that. Ayanna?
And Taylor, back to the talks that the president had this influence over. Any clear indication as to exactly what the president is looking for, in particular when it comes to the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine?
You know, it's really been hard to track because President Trump throughout the last year has kind of ping-ponged back and forth between being really critical of Russia and then being really critical of Ukraine. Right now, the pressure seems to be more on Ukraine, even though Russia is continuing to attack civilians in Ukraine. So it'll be interesting to see over time if these talks can kind of move the goalposts in any way. President Trump says repeatedly that he wants to see this war end. Next week is 4 years since Russia initially invaded, and that's why these talks continue to take place. But it's really going to take Presidents Putin and Zelensky to either meet in person or to be willing to give up something on their end to reach a resolution. The Trump administration and the president in particular have indicated they don't want to negotiate this forever. So if they don't see movement, the president might eventually back away.
Taylor, we appreciate your reporting from the White House. And it is now time for a break. Coming up, I'll turn back to Mayor Mamdani's proposed spending plan when I'm joined by First Deputy Mayor Dean Fulihan and the city's budget director, Sharif Suleiman. Stay with us.
My time at New York One has shown me that in the city that never sleeps, the news never stops. So as the day winds down, turn to the rush hour.
Good afternoon, I'm Monica Bergman.
To catch up on the stories that matter across the 5 boroughs, with in-depth interviews from the city's newsmakers, plus the latest forecast. Catching you up with today, preparing you for tomorrow. Right here on the Rush Hour. Weekdays from 4 to 7 p.m.
It's only a slice. It's only made possible by Spectrum, connecting businesses of all sizes, like small businesses, instantly serving up orders and inventory on the Spectrum Fiber broadband network, and factories, seamlessly connecting to farmers in the field with tailored solutions that always deliver. It's only a slice. It's only everything. Get your business free fiber-powered internet forever. Call to find out how.
I'm Chris Jakovic. I served in the United States Air Force and I deployed 3 times. So in 2017, I was serving as an Air Force First Sergeant. Our motto in that role is, my job is people, everyone is my business. But unfortunately in that year, I would lose my own brother, Lance Corporal Adam Jakovic, to suicide. The majority of veteran suicides are from guns. I store my weapons securely, not only for myself, but for my family. My service never stops.
At Spectrum Noticias, we recognize that our New York City community is vibrant and diverse.
Spectrum Noticias delivers balanced coverage of the stories that matter in our communities and across the country.
Our journalists are based in the neighborhoods we cover, ensuring you get in-depth reporting on what's happening in the places we call home.
So join us at Spectrum Noticias. We're always on, always there for you.
Now available on your TV. Check your local listings. Also available on the Spectrum News app.
Welcome back to Inside City Hall, where we're turning back to tonight's top story, Mayor Mamdani's preliminary budget proposal. As we mentioned earlier, the mayor today laid out what he says are two options for addressing the city's $5.4 billion budget shortfall. The first one is his main campaign promise to raise taxes on wealthy New Yorkers and corporations. But without Governor Hochul on board, Mayor Mamdani also floated a plan B, raising property taxes and dipping into the city's reserves. Negotiations between the mayor and city council will take place over the next several months. The final budget isn't officially due until July 1st. Joining me now to talk more about this preliminary budget proposal is a special City Hall panel. Dean Houlihan is the first deputy mayor, and Sharif Sulahan is the city's budget director. Welcome to the program. Great to see you both.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. To be with you.
Dean, I'll begin with you. I know and I fully understand the mayor is saying raising property taxes, this is something that would be an absolute last resort. But has the administration thought about and talked through how you explain this to New Yorkers who just a few months ago elected Mamdani on an affordability agenda?
So we still, everyone in the administration and certainly the mayor believes strongly in the affordability agenda. We also said we were going to deliver services and give New Yorkers the excellence they deserve in day-to-day city operations. What we did not expect was the dramatic budget crisis that we inherited. And that it's not just us saying this. We have both the state controller, two city controllers, yes, who have identified a very serious problem with city spending, and we have to right-size that. We have to make sure that the city is on sound fiscal ground, and we're looking to Albany to help us do that. But there are pieces of the affordability agenda in here. Childcare, the agreement that we were able to reach on January 8th, very early in our administration, provided $1.2 billion to fix 3K, to fix the system that has been failing for the past 4 years, to make sure that parents can send their 3-year-olds close to their home and have high quality early education. And we're expanding for the first time to 2-year-olds this year and next. And that was an agreement with the governor, and that is part of this budget. So we remain very committed to the affordability agenda. We believe we're delivering that very quickly, but we have to fix this budget crisis.
Still, Mamdani has been pretty critical of the city's current property tax system. In fact, this predates, his criticism predates him actually becoming the mayor. Here's what Mamdani had to say in a conversation with Errol Lewis back in September.
What we see is that it's a property tax system that is widely understood to be inequitable, and it also has real ramifications around rental properties, as well as the ability to produce the mass scale of housing that we need to. Because a successful housing platform is one that speaks to all 8.5 million New Yorkers who call the city home.
So, Sharif, my question to you is, why even discuss potentially having a property tax hike when the mayor has already called out the current system as being inequitable?
The mayor has been very clear that we need property tax reform. It's near universal sentiment that the system right now is broken. It's not fair. It's opaque. It is hard to understand. He's been very clear that we need to prepare a proposal, which we are doing, and in a matter of weeks, we're going to send to Albany for consideration. The property tax system needs structural change. I was privileged enough to serve as the executive director of the New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform. So I know firsthand the structural changes, what they would mean for the effective tax rates for homeowners across the city. That is what we need. We need homeowner relief programs attached to the structural changes that need to be done for the property tax system, and the mayor's been very clear. That is what he would like to see and like to pursue.
And did that conversation come up on Tin Cup Day, property tax reform?
It did come up, okay. And it came up, you know, long before he became mayor. His campaign platform included it. He's been saying it, as you just noted in the interview. He has been talking about property tax reform because he realizes that the system is inequitable and he really wants to fix it for those homeowners across the city.
Dean, there are some areas where there will be some increased spending. So the city's going to be hiring more lawyers, investing in programs. Why spend in areas where it's not mandated? And how does that spending factor into the overall budget gap?
So most of the spending in this budget, in this preliminary budget, and we should remind everyone, this is a preliminary budget. On May 1st, we'll have an executive budget, and then with the city council, an adopted budget in early June. So this is the beginning of that process. And the state is in the middle of their budget process. So we're very hopeful. We have developed a very cooperative and positive relationship. We had an agreement again of $1.2 billion for early education in the beginning of January. Yesterday, the governor said, here's another $1.5 billion that can help us in this fiscal crisis. And now we have a $5.4 billion remaining gap that we need Albany's help to get to a conclusion on. And a conclusion that hopefully does not require us to do the property tax. On the spending side, the vast majority of this is for city commitments, is for things that the prior administration had committed to and was actually not funding, to the tune of almost $14 billion. We are stating here in a very transparent way, here are the requirements. The actual new spending is a fraction of the budget. It's about 4%. It's a very small piece. And even that is for things like paying for the snow removal, dealing with more homeless services, hiring lawyers so that we actually can do more reforms, both protecting New Yorkers, but also find savings. Things that had been neglected over the past 4 years, we're addressing.
The mayor laid out two options today. Option one, higher taxes on the wealthy, on corporations. Governor Hochul said she's not interested. His option two is to potentially raise property taxes. We've heard from the city council speaker today. She believes that this should not even be on the table. What's option three?
Well, the mayor has been very clear in terms of presenting options in terms of revenue generation, but also this plan includes a significant savings plan, $1.7 billion in new savings. That will be accomplished by 1.5% in fiscal year 2026, 2.5% in fiscal 27. The mayor signed an executive order that establishes chief savings officers in each agency. They will be charged with looking at outside consulting contracts, redundant operations, programs that are ineffective. Their work will inform how we achieve those savings. We would like to accomplish savings with a scalpel, not with a blunt instrument. Their work, initially due by March 20th, will be the beginning of the process. It is by no means a one-time effort. It is a recurring effort, and that's the goal. But part of our job is to make sure that we have a balanced budget. By law, we have to have a balanced budget, and that is why the last resort option that the mayor presented today shows the property tax increase and shows the rate on reserves, because we need to balance the budget in the preliminary. But as Dean said, it is a preliminary budget. As we go forward, conversations will continue as the state budget process progresses, and we're confident that we can get additional assistance.
One more piece it's important to mention. The mayor did talk about taxing the rich and firmly believes in that, but he also said there's an imbalance, an historic imbalance between what New York City what New York City's residents and business and employees contribute to the state of New York and what we get back. And we did find, particularly during the Cuomo years, that that imbalance grew. So while New York from 2010 to 2020 contributed more than 60% of the revenues that New York State was getting, the amount of money we received back had stayed flat. Yeah. In addition, cost shifts had been moved to the city. Yep. Time and time again. So part of this is to also ask the state, let's take care of that imbalance. Yeah. And the governor yesterday actually did identify areas to reverse that.
Dean, we really appreciate your time. Thank you for being with us, Sharif, as well. Obviously, there's a lot more to this conversation, and so we hope to have you both back on the show soon. It is now time for a break. Coming up, there are growing calls across the state to direct more funding towards pilot programs that dispatch trained professionals instead of police officers to individuals experiencing mental health crisis. We'll bring you a report from Albany next.
After 30 years of forecasting for New York, I've learned it takes a dedicated team to cover all the weather our city has to offer. As chief meteorologist at New York One, I'm honored to be able to help New Yorkers plan their day.
Morning, noon, or night, our team is here to bring you accurate forecasts you can count on, from severe weather updates to our Weather on the Ones. Watch the New York One weather experts with your Weather on the Ones on your TV and on the go with the Spectrum News app.
I moved from Dallas to Los Angeles all by myself. The order of things I wanted to set up was internet, water, then power. I needed to take a shower, but I really did need the internet for work and to watch my shows. That's kind of a crazy thing to admit in front of a camera. Pretend I didn't say that. I got to Spectrum. I was so relieved that I was getting the best bang for my buck. It was a huge weight taken off of my shoulders.
Real customers, real savings. To see how much you can save, visit spectrum.com/save.
I'm an ex-drug dealer, and I'll be your sub today. Two milligrams of fentanyl can be lethal. A lethal dose is in here. Who gets it, I won't know.
It's cheap, it's potent, and it's profitable.
The sad reality is fentanyl is being mixed into everything now.
More kitchen now.
My father was a New York City firefighter. My mission, like his, is to serve New Yorkers in a city that doesn't stop when the sun goes down. Being with New York One since the beginning, I'm now honored to join you even earlier each weeknight. Starting at 8 with New York Tonight, we'll explore the latest news developments, followed by New York One at 10 to wrap up your day. So join me each weeknight starting at 8 right here on New York One.
Thank you for staying with us here on Inside City Hall. The push to pass Daniels Law, or at least bolster funding for its gradual implementation, continues. Upstate reporter Jack Arpey has the details in this report.
What they need is care, not a police response. But today, we are also here because progress is not enough.
The push to advance legislation, moving communities away from relying on police for mental health crisis response, continues at the state capitol. Luke Sakini, Vice President for Public Policy at the Alliance for Rights and Recovery, says the $8 million for Daniels Law pilot programs in last year's state budget falls short of what is needed for counties to create a solid foundation.
They don't want a program to start up and for the community to begin relying on it and then have to close the program. So we want to make sure that these programs are invested in now.
Daniel's Law was named for Daniel Prude, who died in Rochester police custody while experiencing a mental health crisis back in 2020. Sakini points out that for communities to set up the complicated infrastructure required to transform their response, the money allocated for pilots should fall in line with what the Daniel's Law Task Force recommended back in 2024.
And split between 3 groups, that means that each group is likely getting less than $1 million, which is significantly lower than what the recommendations outlined in the task force report.
Advocates hope the solution could come as part of state budget negotiations. Lawmakers like Assembly sponsor Harry Bronson saw last year's investment in those pilot programs, as well as a statewide technical assistance center, as significant wins.
That's a good start.
But acknowledge that there is a need for more funding.
We need to make sure that we continue to fund pilots, that we expand those pilots across the state, that we continue to move forward.
And Sakini says in addition to bolstering the pilot programs, more money is needed for the Technical Assistance Center. Jack Arpine, New York 1.
And it is time for a break. Coming up, we'll reflect on the legacy of civil rights champion Reverend Jesse Jackson when I'm joined by National Urban League President Mark Morial. Stay with us.
We have so many ways to stay connected. A single touch can bring us closer to the families we love, the friends we know, and the city we share. And Spectrum helps us keep connected throughout the day, every day. Including more ways to watch New York One as a Spectrum Internet customer. Watch Spectrum News New York One on the Spectrum News app, available on all your favorite devices.
There's an international travel plan with Spectrum that was an additional $10 a month, as opposed to paying a ridiculous amount per day for roaming fees. This literally felt like my old phone carrier was reaching their hand into my wallet and just helping themselves to some of my cash. I like having no surprises when it comes to my cell phone bill. And with Spectrum, that's been the case. So it saved me a ton of money.
Real customers, real savings. To see how much you can save, visit spectrum.com/save.
Every day tells a new story. At Mornings on One, we're dedicated to bringing you the stories that matter most to start your day, with in-depth coverage of the day's news.
I'm Pat Kernan. Here are the stories we're following.
And weather updates every 10 minutes.
Tomorrow, some morning sunshine possible. Clouds take over.
It's our responsibility to get you the information you need before you head out the door. Mornings on One. Weekdays starting at 6 on the Spectrum News app. Free for Spectrum and Xfinity customers.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
Welcome back to Inside City Hall. Tributes have been pouring in from across the country today, mourning the loss of civil rights champion and two-time presidential hopeful Reverend Jesse Jackson, who died today at the age of 84. Jackson is referred to by many as a protege of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Here to talk more about Jackson's legacy and his effect on the politics of the nation is the president and CEO of the National Urban League, Mark Morial. Good evening and welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Mark, after working so closely with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. up until his death, how did Reverend Jackson find that balance of preserving Dr. King's legacy while also charting a path for a new generation of civil rights leadership?
Well, I think it was important that Reverend Jesse Jackson moved to Chicago and that he took, if you will, the economic portfolio of SCLC and turned it into Operation Breadbasket, which became PUSH, People United to Save Humanity. So in many respects, Chicago was uncharted grounds. Dr. King had visited there in 1966. It was a challenging visit, and civil rights of the 1960s was more about the South than it was about the North. So Jesse Jackson championed, I think, in Chicago, economic opportunity, economic justice, and economic freedom, but also became an important part of that city's political fabric in the 1970s and certainly in the 1980s.
So often, Reverend Jackson is spoken of just as a civil rights leader, but I really want to discuss with you today his 84, his 88 runs for the White House and how they really pushed both the Democratic Party and American politics as a whole.
So, Ayan, as someone that covers municipal politics, you would probably be interested in this nuance. One of the things that inspired Reverend Jackson's 84 election was the way in which National Democrats had treated Harold Washington after he won the Democratic nomination for mayor of Chicago in '83. They didn't embrace him. They didn't endorse him. They, in many respects, snubbed Harold Washington. That, I think, compelled Reverend Jackson to understand that the Democratic establishment, the Democratic orthodoxy, had to be challenged. And his candidacy in '84 was about that, while at the same time offering a critique and an alternative vision to Reaganomics, which was devastating urban communities because of its defunding emphasis. Reverend Jackson also, I think, in that campaign, offered a vision through the Rainbow Coalition, the idea of bringing all ethnic and economic groups together, a very public, if you will, forward-thinking vision for the Democratic Party, which at that time was in a crisis. They were in a crisis because after the New Deal and Franklin Roosevelt and the Kennedy-Johnson years, to some extent, the Democrats had lost multiple elections and lost their real hold on the American people. I think Reverend Jackson, in articulating this concept of the rainbow, was far ahead of his time, because I think today there's a greater understanding that coalition building, multiracial coalition building, a multiracial democracy is the true vision for the future of this country.
And talk to me about the ways in which Reverend Jackson's 84 and 88 runs ultimately paved the way for Barack Obama in 2008.
So it paved the way for Barack Obama, but even before that, so one of the central features of Jackson's 84 and 88 campaign was to expand the electorate, was to register people to vote, was to inspire the disaffected who had stopped voting to vote. And he registered millions and millions of new voters. That helped David Dinkins in New York in '89, Doug Wilder in Virginia in 1989, Bill Clinton in 1992, and certainly, of course, Barack Obama later on. His efforts to democratize the selection process for president within the Democratic primary system also helped Barack Obama, because no longer did you have a winner-take-all system, which sort of put a premium on backroom politics and created a more open nominations process. So Jackson has not gotten his due, I think, for the role he played in really ushering in a new generation of Democratic politics.
You were on stage with Jesse Jackson in 2024 at the Democratic National Convention. What did that moment mean for you?
It was very special to be with him and for him to be recognized in his hometown of Chicago for the incredible work he had done there, but also for his transformative campaign back in 1984, which in effect was 40 years earlier. And I was pleased that they saw fit to give Reverend Jackson a main stage opportunity. So all of us who were there consider Reverend Jackson a mentor, consider him a friend. And I remind people, Jesse Jackson was not a perfect man, but he was a perfect servant.
Absolutely. How did you first come to know Jesse Jackson, and how did the Reverend influence your own career as mayor of New Orleans, as the CEO of the National Urban League? What was that like?
Snuck into a speech when I was 15 years old. Our friends and I, Jesse was speaking at a convention in New Orleans, and we literally had gone to the convention to go to a teenage party that was taking place. And we saw a poster that said Reverend Jesse Jackson speaking. So I told my friends, because I was a bit of an activist at the time, I said, Jesse Jackson, I've read about him in Jet Magazine. Let's go hear him speak. So we kind of had to sneak in to hear him speak, and he gave a compelling speech. Now, you got to remember, Jesse Jackson was, at that time, a young man in his early 30s. He had an afro. He didn't dress in conventional buttoned-up attire. So for us, he was relatable. The Jesse Jackson I know and I remembered was a young activist, a young political candidate. He was only in his early 40s when he ran for president. It was an inspiration to me. I got a chance to serve as a delegate to his 84 and 88 convention while I was in my 20s. Of course, he inspired my candidacy and my work because he demonstrated how the philosophy of civil rights and equal opportunity could be brought into a political campaign.
What lessons do you think political organizers today can learn from Reverend Jackson and all of the work that he put in over decades?
The concept of electoral expansion, the concept of campaigning to register those who are locked out and left out. All too often, in too many elections, it is those who do not vote that decide an election. And I think what Reverend Jackson demonstrated is that you could appeal to the locked out, the left out, the disaffected, those that are not registered with a message of inspiration, a message of hope, and a message of substance. And so that, to me, for anyone that is thinking of running in the future, they should study Jesse Jackson.
And my final question for you, talk to me a bit about how Reverend Jackson, came to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina and how he helped your beloved city rebuild.
I just found, it's interesting, my mom died and I found a photo of Reverend Jackson. We're all together. Reverend Al is there, myself, a number of other leaders. When Reverend Jackson led a march across the bridge it was early 2006, when so many New Orleanians were living spread out across the country, and it was a right to return march that he held. So Jesse always stood up in moments of great crisis. Jesse always provided leadership in those most difficult moments, and in doing so, he gave mobilization, he gave courage, and he defined the time with moral clarity.
Mark Morial, thank you for sharing your insight with us.
Always.
Reverend Jesse Jackson was 84 years old.
And that's a look at some of what's in the papers this morning.
You're done with the sports section.
Today's story is about the latest chapter for a beloved local business.
It's a beautiful day with temperatures in the 60s, but showers are expected in the next hour.
In a city that's always on the go, it's important to stop to hear the stories that connect us.
The news that matters to New Yorkers. That's what brings us together. That's Mornings on One.
Weekdays starting at 6.
You might think Spectrum is just for your home, but Spectrum is seamless connectivity everywhere. It's the network making the other networks sweat. Connectivity from an actual internet company, because internet is what you actually use your phone for. It's way more than 5G. With Spectrum One, it's 5G and fiber-powered internet, seamlessly combined for the fastest wireless speeds. Don't believe us? That's why Spectrum is the country's fastest growing mobile provider. Spectrum One. It's only the seamless connection you love at home. Everywhere.